Hi everyone and welcome to our International Relations show. Today we will talk about what is meant by the term liberal world order. So in order to answer this question we have to go back to 1945 after the Second World War, because once victorious the United States and its allies in the West decided that the world should be organized so that no country will try again to take control of a continent. And under the vision of liberal theories, this nation led by the United States established a new order of multilateral cooperation that brought with it a creation of new international entities in several areas, such as the World Bank, which at the time was called the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, which provided aid to developing countries and at the time helped countries affected by the war, as well as the International Monetary Fund, the NHGO, to defend the North Atlantic and create a joint defense against the growth of the Soviet Union. The UN, whose objective was to maintain peace and international security. The WTO, among others. With this, most of the countries of the world were linked to the multilateral cooperation base on liberal principles that were standard for the formation of the liberal world order, such as democracy, the rule of law, free market, guarantee of human rights, sovereign equality of states, civil liberties. An example of this is that the institutions that were founded were created based on these principles. For example, the ONU has a liberal democratic organization mode and pushed respect for the rule of law and human rights of people. The WTO is responsible for strengthening free trade between nations, highlighting the principles of competition that occur in the international market and non-discrimination. There are also multilateral organizations created later as the International Criminal Court and the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, which are also responsible for ensuring this. This previous model was the one that began with the so-called Liberal World Order I. However, this would have undergone changes with the fall of the Soviet Union, and consequently with the decline of communism in many of the countries of Eastern Europe and part of Asia, as it brought with it not only the accession of some of these countries to multilateral organizations, but also a new era of this order known as Liberal World Order II.
However, the arrival of new agents to this type of institutions, such as China and Russia, who have questioned the liberal order in the last decades, has generated a sort of internal resistance and doubts to the same international liberal order by actors who are already affiliated to many of these multilateral organizations. And even though they are affiliated to many of them, they generate resistance and state that they do not accept certain decisions of the organizations or do not adhere to certain treaties. This leads to generate a kind of hypocrisy because they are only adhered to what is convenient for them, and in the rest of the matters, they stay away from the multilateral order. So consequently, this could trigger a crisis for the international world order to the extent that it is useless that they are theoretically adhere to this type of organizations if in the end they do not fully support their decisions.
For example, Russia is in the United Nations, and yet they invited Ukraine no matter how many people will die, lose their families, and migrate. Or another example that we can talk about is about the United States, who in the Trump administration, they did not agree to join the Paris Treaty because this would lead to limit many companies and even end them, in order to mitigate the gas emissions. Another example in the United States is the Trump's Wall, where Latinos were discriminated against and their rights were violated, regardless of belonging to the United Nations. And finally, we have an example of China, who, despite being linked to the United Nations and the WTO, violates human rights and worker rights only for the benefit of having cheaper labor.
Now we can conclude that the term of international liberal order is an aggregation of various kinds of rules of order and institutions where there are deep rules and norms of sovereignty, because it is not a thing that the states join or resist, as defined by the internationalist John Ikenberry. For us, more than that is a group of relations constituted in global rules, based on liberal aims, which involve international cooperation through multilateral institutions and globalization that is constantly advancing and changing. That's all for us. Thanks for watching.
Created using Powtoon.